If you engage in something or partake in an activity that triggers significant dopamine release, it can actually cause your baseline dopamine levels to drop. Consequently, you may start feeling pretty down, and many individuals mistakenly try to pursue that same dopamine-inducing activity or substance again, hoping it will elevate their baseline and recreate the intense pleasure they experienced before. However, instead of experiencing a peak, their baseline dopamine levels continue to decrease. This happens because they're depleting their dopamine reserves more and more. So, how can we approach activities that stimulate dopamine in a healthy and beneficial way? How can we achieve those enjoyable peaks that are so essential to our overall well-being and life experiences without compromising our baseline? The key lies in engaging in activities that provide sustained and healthy increase in dopamine levels. These activities should not only provide occasional peaks, but also help us maintain or even enhance our baseline dopamine levels. One example is playing a video game that brings immense excitement and joy. However, it's important to be mindful of two common outcomes. Firstly, addiction often leads to a narrowing of pleasurable experiences, where the person becomes solely dependent on that particular behavior for dopamine release. This can result in a loss of interest in other aspects of life, such as education, relationships, and personal well-being. Gradually, even the activity that initially brought them pleasure may no longer trigger dopamine release, leading to a deepening state of depression. To avoid such pitfalls, we need to identify activities that can provide us with sustained and healthy increases in dopamine. These activities should not only offer occasional peaks of pleasure, but also help maintain or even enhance our baseline dopamine levels. In recent years, more and more people have been trying out a practice called cold exposure. This trend gained popularity thanks in part to individuals like Wim Hof, who is often referred to as the Iceman. They advocate for activities such as taking cold showers, immersing themselves in ice baths, or simply subjecting their bodies to cold water in various ways. Surprisingly, these cold exposure practices have been found to increase dopamine levels, as well as neuromodulator norepinephrine. A fascinating study was conducted to explore the effects of warm, moderately cold, and very cold water on participants. They tested water temperatures of 32 degrees Celsius, 20 degrees Celsius, and 14 degrees Celsius, respectively. During the study, the researchers measured the concentrations of substances like epinephrine, noradrenaline, and dopamine. The findings were quite intriguing. As participants entered the cold water, they experienced an immediate and significant surge in adrenaline and noradrenaline levels. This sudden increase in stress hormones is a common reaction observed in anyone exposed to cold water. However, what made the study particularly interesting was the gradual and continued rise in dopamine levels. In fact, the dopamine levels reached astonishing heights, peaking at 2.5 times above baseline. To better grasp the significance of these findings, let's compare them to other examples. When we think of dopamine increases, activities such as consuming chocolate often come to mind. These typically result in a doubling of dopamine levels above baseline. Nicotine, a highly addictive substance, can push dopamine levels up to 2.5 times above baseline. Even notorious drugs like cocaine, known for their intense impact on dopamine, produce similar increases. However, what sets the dopamine increase from cold water exposure apart is its sustained nature over a prolonged period. It can take up to 3 hours for dopamine levels to return to baseline, unlike the rapid rise and subsequent crash associated with drugs like cocaine. The prolonged elevation of dopamine resulting from cold water exposure, with its gradual onset and extended duration, is truly remarkable. This gives us a better understanding of why many people feel so good mentally and physically after exposing themselves to cold water. People often describe a sense of calmness and improved focus when they come out of the cold. It seems that cold water exposure has a powerful impact on our brain and body, creating a shift in our overall state. As a result, individuals experience a notable enhancement in their well-being that lasts for quite a while after taking an ice bath or immersing themselves in cold water. Now, let's look at a more common scenario. Imagine someone who enjoys eating foods that release dopamine throughout the week, has a couple of days of drinking on the weekend, engages in intense swimming sessions during the weekend, and goes dancing once on the weekend. At first glance, it may seem like a well-rounded and balanced lifestyle. However, there's a catch. Dopamine is not exclusively triggered by just one of these activities. It responds to all of them. Dopamine plays a role as the currency of our cravings, motivations, and pleasure. When dopamine levels fall below a certain threshold, it becomes challenging to find pleasure in anything anymore. The activities that used to bring us joy no longer have the same effect. This resembles the patterns observed in more severe addictions, such as those to substances like cocaine and amphetamines, which cause significant spikes in dopamine levels. And that's when we see a significant drop in our baseline dopamine levels. It's really important for all of us to engage in activities that bring us joy. I certainly do, and I believe everyone should. Doing things we enjoy is a fundamental part of life. However, what we need to understand is how these peaks in our baseline levels of dopamine are interconnected and how they impact each other. Once we grasp this concept, we can make informed decisions in the short and long term to maintain our dopamine baseline. For individuals who have noticed a decline in their baseline dopamine levels or have tendencies towards addiction, whether it's related to certain behaviors or substances, the way forward usually involves either quitting abruptly or gradually reducing their engagement with the activities or substances that trigger dopamine release. Now, let's talk about the best way to engage in activities or consume things that stimulate dopamine. There are various activities known to evoke dopamine, such as enjoying a piece of chocolate, savoring a cup of coffee, even indirectly. And let's not forget about food and exercise, which can also trigger dopamine release. So, how can we engage with these dopamine-inducing activities in a manner that promotes our well-being and is beneficial for us? How can we experience those peaks that contribute to our overall happiness without compromising on our baseline levels? The key lies in intermittent dopamine release. It's important not to expect or constantly chase after high levels of dopamine release every time we engage in these activities. Instead, we should strive for a balanced approach, allowing ourselves to experience occasional dopamine peaks while maintaining a stable baseline. This way, we can enjoy the positive effects of dopamine without the negative consequences of consistently depleting our baseline levels. Intermittent reward schedules play a central role in keeping us hooked and engaged in different aspects of our lives. This phenomenon can be traced back to our evolutionary history. When our ancestors were searching for water or food, they didn't always find what they were looking for. There was always an element of uncertainty. This is where dopamine reward prediction error comes into play. When we expect something to happen, we become highly motivated to pursue it. If we succeed, we receive a reward in the form of chemicals like dopamine. This reinforcement strengthens our desire to engage in that behavior again. It's the underlying mechanism behind casino gambling, where they entice you to keep coming back, even though the house usually has the advantage. When it comes to activities like schools, sports, or relationships, where you experience victories or positive outcomes, it's crucial to be cautious about allowing yourself to reach extreme dopamine peaks. These peaks often come with a subsequent crash, and it takes time for your dopamine levels to return to a stable baseline. That's why it's important to consider the practical implications of this concept. For instance, if you're engaged in activities that trigger dopamine surges, it's essential to be aware of the potential consequences. Be prepared for the emotional downturns that might follow, and be patient while your dopamine levels stabilize before seeking that intense rush again. Striking a balance between occasional dopamine peaks and maintaining a stable baseline is key to avoiding the negative effects of constant ups and downs. Imagine you're someone who genuinely loves exercising, or maybe you're someone who isn't a big fan but pushes yourself to do it. To make your workout more enjoyable, you incorporate some things like starting with your favorite cup of coffee, taking a pre-workout drink or energy drink, or listening to your favorite audios at the gym. Sounds pretty awesome, right? Well, it is great, except for one catch. When you combine all these elements to achieve a dopamine release and aim for a big dopamine peak, you're actually increasing the number of conditions required to feel pleasure from that activity in the future. There's one version where you do everything you love to create the ultimate workout experience, jamming to your favorite tunes, hitting the gym at your preferred time, sipping your pre-workout drink, if that's your thing. But there's another version where you skip the dopamine-enhancing extras and focus solely on the exercise itself without relying on external sources to boost your dopamine levels. You might be thinking, that sounds a bit dull. I want to keep enjoying my workouts. However, that's the whole point. If you want to stay motivated for the long haul in activities like school, exercise, relationships, or any pursuit, it's crucial to ensure that the dopamine peaks, especially the really intense ones, don't happen too often. When something becomes too frequent, it's beneficial to vary the level of dopamine experienced with each engagement in that activity. This way, you can strike a balance that keeps you motivated without relying solely on those dopamine spikes. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more videos.